Here in Central Park. Who would have thought that we came out to Central Park? Me and Nurse Jennie braved the Brazil Puerto Rican Day Parade. Right, Jenny?
Yes, I got real lucky though. At least you invited me to come out here and not be inside. I mean, I got to come and be on the show today out here in Central Park. It's a beautiful June Sunday.
I know. I can't believe that we made this happen out here in Central Park in the center of the universe, New York City. But, you know, we made it happen. Unfortunately, my two regular co-hosts, both Courtney and Nicole, can't be here today. But, you know, Jenny came out. She braved coming cross town from the west side because she's an Upper West Side girl. But, hey, we make it happen. So we're going to go to the commercial and then we're going to come back and talk to you guys about what's been going on this. So welcome back. Like I said, we have Nurse Jennie Fiola on today. I won't do the gratitude of giving the introduction, so I'll let Jennie introduce herself and talk a little bit about herself and what she does.
So I'm Jenny. I've been a critical care nurse for the last 9 years. I work in ICUs. I travel around. I get to work next to this guy pretty much 3 nights a week, saving lives and talking about things. So now here I am getting to talk to him in Central Park. I mean, what a good day.
I know. And you're a Florida girl, so.
I am a Florida girl.
How is this weather?
This weather is great. The fact that it is June and we're not sweltering out here is pretty amazing. I do appreciate the New York summers though. Those winters are very long, so I'm glad that the sun is shining.
Right, exactly. So we're out here getting our vitamin D. And it's like, so Jenny, you've gotten an idea of what the topics are for this week.
Right.
This crazy last couple of weeks. I mean, I didn't have a show for a few weeks because I was in Brazil. And, you know, we work together. So, you know,
living the good life.
Traveling all around. Hey, that's what we do. That's why we're travel nurses. So we can travel, see the world. And I don't have to, like, you know, answer really to like, oh, I'm here for 4 months. No, I'm done in 3 months, and that's it. But it's been a crazy couple of weeks. Some of these topics actually that came up during the course of the week were really amazing and just absurd. The first one being the nurse, luckily in Germany, who was convicted of 85 murders. So it was said that he killed approximately, they said could have been up to 100 people.
Right.
He was convicted of 85. He's admitted to 55 murders. And that's just really, really, really crazy.
Yeah. So the big thing with the numbers that blew me away is that it's 100 or 85 convicted and 85 that they know of. And it just blows my mind to think that that's the amount of people that died from this. Not right. Even, you know, the story is that he was lacing, like giving these people lethal injections essentially, or meds that weren't prescribed to them so he could revive them and show off his resuscitation skills. So my biggest thing about the numbers is how many people did he do this to and was successful in reviving. Mm-hmm. So the numbers to me feels like he did this to significantly more than 100 people.
Right.
And
right.
Yeah, so it's purely the amount of numbers and the time frame was so short.
Was the time frame not short?
The time frame was short. So mathematically, it blew my mind because a normal nurse, I hate to use the term normal, works 3 shifts a week. He did this in 4 years.
Right.
That's 150 shifts a year if he never took a vacation.
At 2 different hospitals.
So 500 shifts and 200, like 100 people you've killed. So my thought is there's got to be at least, you had to save 50%. In theory,
right?
For odds. So you're talking 200 people. Right.
I mean, so we have a clip from the actual report from the story. Thank God, like he's in Germany, but we're gonna play the clip now.
Was to help make people better. Instead, Niels Hogel abused his position as a nurse and murdered his patients. Now, decades after the killing began, a court has jailed him for life for killing 85 people. The worst killing spree in post-war Germany. This man lost his grandfather to Hogel 16 years ago.
I promised my family at the time that I would not only ensure that the killer is imprisoned, but also those responsible. I believe it's very important for all of us to bring those responsible to justice, those who made it possible that these murders became a series of murders.
Some of the victims died here in Oldenburg, where Hogel worked as a nurse until 2002. Many more died in Delmenhorst, where he was employed until the time of his arrest in 2005. Hiding behind a book, he was convicted and sentenced for 2 murders 10 years later. Last October, he was back in court, again refusing to reveal his identity, to face further charges. He admitted to being the country's deadliest killer of modern times, murdering 100 patients with lethal injections, so that he could play the hero by trying to revive them.
So we won't belabor watching any more of this video. I think it's really crazy. So he says in his statement, he says he's sorry.
Yeah. It just makes me laugh. He's sorry, but there was he had intention every time he did this. So you have remorse now? I don't understand. Like, this wasn't things that he did unknowingly. It wasn't a practice that he just didn't know was incorrect. This was a malicious act. I mean, this is a conscious malicious act. Right. He knowingly injected them with drugs that he know would cause a cardiac arrest, and then he would come to the rescue. Yeah. And I think it's so crazy because they interviewed like his coworkers, and they called him Rambunctious Rambo or something like that. Like, who have you ever considered call me Rambunctious Rambo? You probably call me lazy, but far from like Rambunctious Rambo.
It's rotten to the core. I'm talking.
Said that they felt like every time he worked, he had like a black cloud over him. And as nurses, we all we get into we call these stigmas, and we do say at work, when your assignment goes bad, regularly. Sometimes it happens in groups. We sometimes feel like we have a black cloud, but just again, I argue purely on the numbers. He had a 4-year black cloud. No one realized a 4-year black cloud. I mean, there's times, and as well as we all do, when you're working, these patients can go bad, and you tend to get those patients, or your patients go bad, and it has nothing to do with your nursing practice or your nursing care. It just that's kind of how the luck falls for you. It rains, but 4 years. 4 years.
I just don't know how that didn't raise a red flag to anybody.
Another thing that stood out with me was like he was in his 40s. So, I mean, he obviously, I don't know how long he had been practicing nursing, but that's some really kind of like, you're in your 40s. I was like, okay, if they say he's in his 60s, he's been doing this over the course of a career. Right. But obviously his career has been short. Right. And even shorter, considering that. So they found this out in 2000, I think, in 2008, and then I think that he was actually just convicted a couple of years ago. Like, I'm so confused. Like, what was he doing? Hanging out without a nursing license, like during that time? Yeah, not nursing anymore. Know. But was he nursing to begin with? What do you mean? Do we consider this nursing when he went to work to be basically a serial killer? Oh, that's a good one. So nurse versus serial killer, the two can't be synonymous. I guess they could be synonymous, but was he nursing at work? I assume you could be a serial killer and a nurse, but is nurse just a title at that point?
Because we could take you back to Florence Nightingale. Don't do any. Aren't we supposed to be helping?
Yes.
Where was the help?
Do no harm.
Right.
Do no harm. They don't. I don't know if they teach that in Germany. And that's American nursing. So we're gonna go because on the same line of killing people, I don't want to just choose the topics where people were being killed. But another story recently was the Ohio doctor who actually I think I reported on a few months ago that was overdosing his patients with fentanyl.
Yes.
And now while I maybe I'm wrong to say that he was overdosing his patients because what doctors actually get push meds, right?
Right.
But so we have like a picture of the article, and I think this is maybe him and his wife. For all intents and purposes, just kind of like a normal looking guy that's kind of like, looks straight laced. He looks young, for the most part, he looks handsome. So he doesn't look like, like a troll. I'll be honest. I don't know what would have encouraged him to do such a thing.
Yeah, and I feel the big thing of this too is they're convicting this doctor, but like you said, did the doctor overdose them? I mean, he ordered the overdose.
Right.
Did he actually overdose them? And that's where the question really comes in. Like, who is at fault here? Is it just the doctor? Is it just the one who decided to give the dose of fentanyl or order the dose of fentanyl, or is it the person who actually gave the dose of fentanyl?
It's a really good question. I'm not gonna lie. I've worked in. I've been a burn ICU nurse in my career, and I've given very high doses of fentanyl, and I've given high doses of ketamine when carrying out burn care, and even sometimes after burn care because it's an incredibly painful process. I can't recall the actual doses, but it was definitely more. It was definitely higher than what we typically give on a regular ICU.
Right. And, working in trauma as well and in the ICU, we do give very large doses. But at the same time, I feel like nursing and you can agree or disagree with this, but there's that patient advocacy part of it. And you do know that, yes, you're going to give a burn patient or a trauma patient or, a patient with high tolerance, quite large doses in comparison to someone who, with a lower pain
threshold.
Situation. Yeah, threshold and situation. But it kind of comes into question where, at what point do you question the order? We question orders every day when it's, our doctor tells us to get our, patient with bilateral knee amputations out of bed. We go and say that's an inappropriate order. At what point before you give a med do you think that that's an inappropriate order? The other thing is we're not talking probably one time dose that just did the thing. So, where do you say, well, why'd the dose increase, or where was pharmacies check on that too? Not just nursing. I don't put it just on the nurse. The nurse, yes, usually administers the med, but what about the pharmacy check on why did this dose increase? Where was the pain? Right. Where do we work up? We don't just start at 100.
Right. Right. It's a lot of questions. But we won't color it because there is a actual video of it. So we're going to go to the video and let the people judge for themselves.
Dr. William Husel.
Do you maintain that you're an innocent man here in all of this?
Walking in silence, ignoring reporters.
Dr. Husel, your patients' families want to hear from you. What do you say to that?
As he headed to an Ohio courtroom to turn himself in, pleading not guilty to 25 counts of murder. Husel is accused of killing 25 intensive care patients over the last 4 years by giving them deadly doses of the powerful opioid fentanyl while working in one of the largest hospital systems in central Ohio. Prosecutors say Husel prescribed those patients between 500 and 2,000 micrograms of the drug, up to 20 times the typical dose, ultimately causing or at least quickening their deaths.
This breach of a doctor's oath is vile.
The charges coming after a 6-month investigation that began after a pharmacist alerted hospital officials to the high dosage prescriptions. Husel was fired last December, his medical license suspended a month later. Husel's attorney says he never meant to kill anyone and that he plans to clear his name at trial.
This is not a murder case. It's, Dr. Husel.
So he is maintaining his innocence according to the video. and he thinks that he wants to clear his name, is what he has said that he wants to do. The interesting thing is, so the nurses and the pharmacists involved have been put on administrative leave, and they're not brought up in the charges. But he is, of course, the center of all of this because he made the decision that that's what his patients needed.
Right.
Right.
And that's where it makes you like, I definitely think he ordered it. There's no question about it. He definitely, had decided that this is what his patients needed. Where his clinical, he's going to have to validate his rationale and clinical judgment, as far as that goes. But again, it brings you to question, does a nurse, there was clearly a system fault. Mm-hmm. I don't know that each individual nurse should be held personally accountable if all these orders are going, it wasn't one nurse who pushed all these meds. We did track it back to one doctor who ordered all the meds. So yeah, that's where your root cause is. But do you, at what point do you say, well, 10 nurses did it, or 3 pharmacists said it was okay? Right. So we've I feel like the story has trickled back, so we find the root of it all. But where, like you said, they're on administrative leave, but where is the fault in that? Is there, should they be held accountable, or, should they not? But there's definitely a system breakdown. Right. And that's where I think the bigger issue lies is, we do everything based on clinical practice and, best evidence. And I would like to see so much, where is this hospital and this healthcare system fixing this problem? We can hold whoever we want accountable lawfully, but where is the breakdown for the system? There was a system breakdown.
I think that sometimes because we are healthcare professionals and we work so closely with our patients, and we can get caught up. I think sometimes there's another victim there, is the patient's family. And part of the story, the family said her husband was brought in because he suffered a trauma from a truck crash. And then, and she walked out of the hospital 4 hours later with her husband being dead. And so, hey, little one. And so with her husband being dead, and she said, to her daughter, what the hell happened? You know what I'm saying? At what point does the family get to say, something wasn't right here,
right?
And I need more answers than saying, oh, your husband came in, he was very sick in a bad crash, in a very bad accident, and he died during the course of that.
Right. And it makes you wonder, if it wasn't for family members, as nurses and in the ICU, we all, WebMDs are devil, as we say.
Oh my God. I'm so tired of WebMD. If I hear his name one more time, I'm suing him myself.
These family members think they're doctors, but at the same time, how many times has this happened and no one questions it? And then, it's not till someone says, no, a family that's a little more hyper, vigilant, and on top of things, they want an autopsy or they want more answers, and these things get uncovered. But, a lot of them families don't have the means, or they don't even have like you said, they're they're scarred. They're in a sense of,
I would be numb.
Yeah,
I would be so numb.
And you think about it, after all the services, I didn't ask the right questions, or I didn't, what really went wrong here. Now it's a little too late. And, you hit a family who's just got a shocking loss, and do you want an autopsy? Well, that's not something they can think of right then and there. So you have these hypervigilant families that then brought light to this, but how many before this are, didn't, we just kind of let you, oh yes, okay, something went wrong. They just take it for, what you say it is as a medical professional.
Right. It's, when I heard this story, even 5 months ago, I think 4 months ago when it came out, and Mount Carmel in Ohio put out the statement for publicity reasons, of course, I was like, wow, this is a place going on again, the reactive about something that should have been done in year 2, year 3, and now it's 5 years later.
Right.
It's over the course of 5 years that he did this.
Yeah. And that's it's kind of even back with the first story. Why does it take 5 years?
Right.
Why do we look back now at 5 years and then we say, oh, let's look at the last 5 years? Where do we wait for the red flag to go off, or the signal that says we need to look into something?
Right. I think it's really sad. I'm praying really for the families, because now the families have to, even the families in year 1 that this happened to, now have to relive all those emotions, and when they buried it with their loved one, and say, you know what, it was a really sad situation that we buried grandma, But now we have to like say, you know what, was it somebody else's decision that grandma got buried?
It's reopening the heartache, and then it also adds an element of anger that wasn't there before.
Right.
You know, now they have this blame where some of these families they've grieved and they've accepted that an accident happened, and I'm not, you know, it obviously wasn't. It was these lethal doses, but now they have a sense of anger that wasn't there before.
Right. So moving on to families, because this other story was the reason why it jarred me was because of its effect on families and the effect on children. I mean, I have a niece and a nephew. This lunch shaming that came out on the news like 4 weeks ago, that's happening all over the country, that says like possibly more than half of the country lunch shames children.
This story shocked me. It shocked me. I think, this lunch, we're lunch shaming children, and it's not even, I mean, I take the lunch part, we're financially shaming these children.
Right.
We're shaming children over finances.
Right.
And
I don't know about you, but I don't come from a well-to-do family. I come from a very poor family. And, you know, many a times my mother, you know, she got up the money, but, you know, but what if, you know, we weren't in a small town where, you know, people talk and people gossip, and I felt some kind of way because I wasn't able to eat lunch. Like, you know.
And it's almost, I mean, the bigger thing to me was, this is like bullying. This is essentially, we are bullying these little children. They're,
right.
You know, the stories were saying how we're making these kids clean and do, and I'm not, you know, I'm not opposed to children cleaning, but you're going to clean to earn your lunch. You know, you're going to clean the lunchroom to earn your lunch. It's just, it's crazy to me. And I thought, you know, what about families that can't pay their mortgage? Do we we don't go after their kids?
Right.
You know,
exactly.
They're children, and we're taking not only, you know, I don't think it's not their responsibility. Children don't have jobs. Their job is to go to school and get their education. And here we're not feeding them because their parents can't afford it, and you know, we're assuming it's a can't afford it thing, but maybe they choose not to send the money. I mean, that's fine too. But either way, these are children.
We don't. You know, it's the choice between, you know what, it's the first of the month. I got to pay the rent, and I got to pay. You know what? I know I'm going through getting these little these school uniforms are so expensive. They're so expensive, these school uniforms.
And I feel this lunch shaming is so hypocritical. We say the reason that we put all these children in uniforms is to make everybody neutral. It's like scrubs in a hospital. You're not supposed to be able to pick out the rich kid next to the poor kid.
Right.
Everybody is neutral, looks the same. Everybody is treated the same. And then, so we put them in uniforms, and then we say, oh, in front of you can't have food.
Right. Well, I think, you know, we have a video. I want to play the video. It was on MSNBC.
Lunch shaming. Maybe you've heard of it. Maybe you've even experienced it. A lot of kids sure have. It's schools publicly harassing students whose parents have not paid their lunch bills. Sometimes the schools even withhold lunch from the children. Now the Department of Agriculture is giving states a July 1st deadline to establish new policies for helping children who cannot afford for their food. One study shows that nearly half of school districts in the country engage in some form of lunch shaming.
In some California school districts, like Los Angeles, a student who can't pay gets half a cheese sandwich.
This follows a wave of stories where students got stamped, called out, or even forced to clean lunch tables just to get a lunch at school.
If children don't have enough money for their food or parents forget to pay, then their child's tray gets dumped in the trash right in front of their friends.
Join me, New Mexico State Senator Michael Padilla, whose legislation to end these practices was signed into New Mexico law last month. Senator, I think this is so incredibly cruel, so heartless. I can't even believe any adult would engage in this. I mean, it's so appalling to me.
Yeah, I grew up in foster homes and the all-faiths receiving home for homeless children, my sisters and I. And, you know, we always said if there was ever anything we could do about some of the stuff we experienced growing up, you know, I was the lucky one. I was the youngest child, and my sisters took me in. We didn't really have anything, and they didn't.
So we're going to cut that short because, I mean, we don't get to see it. You guys get to see it. We've seen it. But, it just boils my blood to think that like a third grader, a fourth grader, a fifth grader is like given a half of a cheese sandwich.
The other part to this is these families are not sending money for these children to have school lunches. Instead of us worrying about the lack of nutrition they're not getting at home, if these families can't afford to send money to school for them to get school lunch, what are they eating if they're eating at home? And instead of worrying about evaluating the home situation, and we're not going to feed them too. So if these are, if this is a problem of a financial problem that they can't afford to send money to school, or they're having to wait for next week's paycheck, and they're living paycheck to paycheck right now, what about the fact that this kid probably didn't get a very balanced or full or nutritious breakfast or dinner? Now at school we're going to give them a half of a cheese sandwich because the school can't afford to feed you. I don't, we're shaming children.
My question is, where did we as a first world country get to where we are, where we tout like we have all this money, we have all of these resources, so many resources that we want to spend millions of dollars to build a wall, but we can't feed our children. Our priorities are mixed up.
Yeah. and what does, my other thing to that is, what does school lunch really cost a family? It's minimal. It's not that much. And so if they can't afford to pay for that, we're then essentially just making a bad situation worse. This child can't doesn't come from a family that can afford to send, lunch money to the public school. And instead of worrying about how we can help the child, not even the whole family, which we should be looking at the whole family, but just the child alone, we're shaming them and embarrassing them. And what does that do it doesn't help the kid in any way. It doesn't help them, minus the nutrition, but then they're going to go to the rest of their day after being embarrassed.
Right.
There's no focus on the big thing, which is educating the children. There's no way a child who's just been shamed or embarrassed in front of his peers is going to go into the afternoon eager and ready to learn.
Right. I think that it's just a really bad step in the wrong direction. I mean, I think also about it from like a health standpoint. As a nurse, I mean, malnourished children.
Right.
Like at least we always knew, like when kids were in school, they could get 1 square meal a day.
Right.
We thought, but I guess maybe not. What happened to like the whole plate teaching and the vitamins and making sure that they get like those, our roughage.
Where does a half a cheese sandwich fall on the food pyramid?
I don't know. On to the so
back to the story. So you were saying, like, from the nursing aspect, there's the nutrients and that part, but there's also the mental health aspect of it all. Like, what are we doing? These are young children. What are we doing to them when essentially the people they're looking to were nope, I'm sorry, your parents didn't pay for your lunch today, so here, we're going to make you an example amongst your peers. There's a whole mental health aspect of that as well, that these are kids.
Right. Exactly. I mean, just the shame that already comes with, like, knowing that you don't have all the same resources as somebody else, and then them choosing to even show you. One story even talked about in one school district, they make them wear wristbands. So you have to wear a wristband that your parents are behind on your lunch.
So these parents have to pay for uniforms so that their children all look neutral, and then we're going to put identifying markers on them that say they can't afford their lunch. Right. Because, in modern society as adults, we all walk around with our annual income just showing on us.
Right. Exactly.
That's essentially what it's like. It's like as if they said, well, if if you make XYZ amount of money, you can wear a green wristband, and we should just all walk around with, like, why we could do it to children, but we would never allow that to happen to adults.
Right. Oh my goodness. So this leads into a really other interesting story. So if we don't want to feed kids, then, there's 8 great states in the 50 states that have passed to ban abortion. 2 states of which have said that, no, 1 state, and unfortunately I'm from that state, unfortunately states that there's no such thing as abortion unless the mother's health is at risk. So there's no abortion, period. The other 7 states have said that if a fetal heart tone is detected being in the 6th to 8th week of pregnancy, then the mother is not allowed to have an abortion.
That topic.
Right.
Yeah, and it goes again, I feel like depending on what side of the coin you're on, you're an extremist when it comes to the topic. And I always say, like, well, how do you decide when? And how do you decide, are they viable without a parent? Is it a host at this point? Do you need, it's such a controversial issue, but I feel like when you get, people are either very, very extreme where they're, it's murder, or, they just feel that it doesn't matter at any point until the baby is full grown and on its own. It's a woman's choice. And it's the problem with it all is it's such a gray line as to when do we consider, a fetus it's a living thing, as is a tree and a dog, but is it viable? And, does it when do we give it human rights? Mm-hmm. And, it's like I said, it's just a topic that there's still no definitive line. There's no answer to when does the fetus deserve, get treated as a living, the human rights, not, mm-hmm. You could also, argue with the fact we give them human rights and then we, parents can choose to have tests done while they're in, in vitro and these things. And it's like, well, okay, do we consent for the child? Do we consent for, if we're going to give them human rights, then at this point we should be signing consents for a child to have tests done while they're in vitro because we're treating them as a human. So, from the nursing aspect and the medical aspect of it all, it's kind of, well, we can't treat them in vitro as a medical thing and then also want them to have basic human rights at the same time. So it's kind of, when do you decide, is this its own independent, being?
Right. Yeah. I think it's really interesting that these lawmakers can find all this time to have conversation about abortions, but they can't have conversations about feeding our kids.
Right.
I mean, so we're going to bring up one story about the Missouri lawmaker. I forget his name. He was a former police officer, and God knows I love police officers. I mean, as nurses, I think nobody is more connected to one another as a profession than nurses and police officers. We do shift work. We do really hard work. And sometimes at moments we don't feel like very appreciated. Right. So this gentleman who is now a lawmaker from the state of Missouri, made a very crazy comment about, so we'll play the story and then we'll talk about it.
This point not start until 8 weeks. Let's just say someone goes out and they have, or they're raped or they're sexually assaulted one night after a college party. Because most of my rapes were not the gentleman jumping out of the bushes that nobody had ever met. That was 1 or 2 times out of 100. Most of them were date rapes or consensual rapes, which were all terrible. But I'd sat in court when juries would struggle with those type of situations where it was a he said, she said, and they would find the person not guilty. Unfortunate if it really happened. But I had no control over that because it was a judge or a jury making those decisions.
I have to, and I wasn't going to speak on this because honestly, as a person, I am personally pro-life. I am a Black woman with lupus. I'm not even sure if I can have children. It's not a child that I don't lay eyes, and God knows I love children. And it's not a child that I lay my eyes on that I don't want. However, that doesn't mean that I get to force anyone to have a child. But let me say this right here and right now. There is no such thing as consensual rape.
Thank you, lady.
So this guy's comment that, first off, I want to know where did he live that 8 out of 10 rape cases that he was called on were of date rape or consensual rape. I mean, he says, oh, they weren't commonly somebody that the person didn't know that jumped out of the bushes. First off, I don't know who jumps out of the bushes. But were consensual rape. And I like the fact that the other Missouri lawmaker came back and, she recognized that she wasn't going to place her own personal values. While she does, as a person, does not believe in abortion, she doesn't believe that it's her right to make that decision for another woman. But then she goes on at the end to say, there's no such thing as consensual rape. I mean,
and yeah, 8 out of 10, like you said, in the bushes. But the shock. The shock. Yeah, no such thing as consensual rape, which I don't know how that even falls into a valid argument. I don't know. But, like you said, she makes that point that it's not her choice to make. And, you know, it's where you kind of decide, is this a medical procedure or is this, you know, something bigger than that? And you have to, and we treat it as a medical procedure. And that's the part where we have no right to tell people what medical procedures they can and can't have. We don't, you know, so if we're going to look at abortion as purely a medical procedure, it's treated as a medical procedure. It's covered under, you know, medical law. You have to be licensed and doctored and the whole nine. Then where do we get off telling people what you can and can't do? There's what other medical procedure do we tell people, you know, we as lawmakers we've decided you can or cannot do this?
Well, no, we're taking a step back. So now we're taking away people's women's right to say, you know what, I don't feel like I'm at a place where I'm ready to have a baby. We all make crazy choices. God knows. I mean, I'm on the side of 40 now, and I haven't always made the best choices in my life, you know, and say, you know, I would rather do the right thing for right now in my life, and, you know, and say, okay, I'm not ready. Right. You know, it's just crazy. So next is they're gonna go do away with mental health. No, you can no longer go see a doctor, and your insurance is no longer covering it. Sorry.
But, you know, and this is so far removed from it, but it kind of goes to these people that go and get a million plastic surgery procedures done. We don't draw a line on that. We don't tell them they can't do these things, but yet the legislative we've gotten involved in this, like I say, a medical procedure. So I feel like that's where it gets really gray, you know, coming from that aspect. Like where do you have the say so into my health? And and what I'm doing, you know, for my health and my body. So, you know, and that's where I say it's just such a gray line. But the numbers and the statistics that they throw out, they have just this formulated opinion, and it's hard to hear.
Right. Even more so. So he goes on to apologize and say, I misspoke. You know, did I say that? Oh, in the moment, you know, but I'm not going to make excuses for myself. In the moment, that's not what I meant. I misspoke, and I apologize. And, you know, it goes back to a few weeks ago, we had the conversation on the show about Maureen Walsh and her making the comment about the critical access hospitals, and that probably the majority of nurses in her state of Washington in critical care hospitals probably spend the majority of their shift playing cards. And then she goes back and say, I misspoke. My mother was a nurse. What becomes of these people who say these really stupid things and make these really brash statements and then go back and say, oh, you know, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that. And then we forget about it 2 weeks later.
And, you know, we all misspeak, but these people, they know, you know, your role. Their role is a public opinion. They're not saying these things in a tea conversation with their cousins.
Right.
They're saying this amongst a camera crew, with people, with interviewers, with, you know, on public forums. And these are people that are there. What they say is what we hear. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm sure that other people before, you know, Maureen Walsh has said that they think nurses play cards or Scrabble or what have you. But they also, you know, they're not her. She was in a public forum. You know, something as simple as, you know, what we're doing today, what we say is documented. You know this is not a conversation that you're having, you know, at home and private. So whether that was she made her opinion known. Right. So yes, she did misspeak. She was extremely incorrect, and you know, our community of nurses made sure that she knew she misspoke. But the same thing, you know, they need to know their audience and their platform, and they know what they do. I think that, you know, using I misspoke as an excuse is just that. It's an excuse. You didn't like the response you got. Right. Exactly. And I think that considering we have this cancel culture, when we cancel, we have this thing that we do when superstars, we'll cancel them and we'll ruin their career, ruin these lawmakers' careers. Okay, don't vote for them again. Right. You know, that's how you cancel them. But no, when it comes to going to the poll, you can't go to the poll and cancel the lawmaker. You don't do that. But you'll get on Twitter or you'll get on Facebook and you'll say, oh, you know, Kevin Hart said this about gay people so many years ago. And he said, I'm sorry, but that's not good enough. Right. But yet you want to cancel his career. Cancel Maureen Walsh, you know? And, you know, part of that is not so much just for the statement. I mean, you know, like you said, people they speak and they say what they feel, but just as we hold celebrities and athletes, we hold them more accountable for the things that they do in their private life because we call them public figures. Why are we not calling these legislators and politicians public figures? Their opinion is heard publicly, and that's when, you know, so we don't hold their accountable the same way. And they, in that role, that's a career path they chose. Like, you have to, you know, have some a little bit of you know, you have to hold strong to what you're saying.
You need to be thoughtful.
Right.
You need to be thoughtful.
There's no accountability.
Well, oh my goodness. Well, another story that we put on the show for this week was nurse suicide.
Right.
One that's like really close to like my heart, as you know, being a nurse and being a mental health care professional in a time where we need so many nurses. We need like over 400,000 nurses, I think they said, within the next 5 years to like accommodate the shortage that we're predicted to have because more people are getting older. But when I saw this story and I saw like the video that we're going to watch and we're going to show, it was like so jarring. Like, wow. Really, this is becoming a thing. This thing is growing out of control. And I've had, you know, nurses as patients, both, you know, and as a nurse in the ICU, and I've had them in my private practice. So, you know, it's I think a time where our profession needs more of us. We need to be supporting one another, and there are all many dynamics to this. But nurses are killing themselves, you know, is on the rise. I think according to the United Kingdom, over the last 7 years, they've had 300 nurses that have committed suicide, and they've done a great job about tracking, you know, nurse suicidality there versus here. So, I mean, what did you think about that when I sent that article over to you?
Yeah, it was, I mean, it was shocking, and it stood out to me that these nurses are not only killing themselves, and it's, you know, it made me take a step back and kind of just think about all the places I've been in the years of nursing. And, you know, being a traveler, we're lucky. We get to work in a lot of great facilities and see a lot of different units. And especially with us in critical care, you know, we deal with death and dying very, very regularly. And, you know, you don't know when you're going in as a brand new green nurse what that impact is going to be to you. And sometimes we don't even really realize kind of how we react to it all. You know, sometimes, you know, you deal with death and dying and you're very okay with it through those 12 hours you've been doing. You know, this is part of your normal routine. It's part of our job. And some people handle it very well and others don't. You know, there's times you see nurses crying with families and there's that controversial, is that okay? You know, kind of issue. Have you crossed the line at that point or have you not? But you don't, you know, sometimes we, as nurses, we're lucky. We go to work, we go home. We don't necessarily have to take our work with us, you know, the physical work of it all, but we do take the, you know, the emotional draw that it puts to us. And there's a lot of times I think that we are supposed, you know, not supposed to, but we've been kind of shaped if we work in those areas where death is very common. You know, in the hospice units and in those palliative care units and in the critical care units, kind of, you know, ERs and the, you know, patients die everywhere. But when, you know, when the number of it is higher, I think we kind of just shape those nurses to like, you got to get tough skin. And, you know, you do to get the job done. You have to be a little, you know, a little bit more receptive to death and dying. But I don't think that the topic of how this affects you doesn't get discussed. I mean, I started thinking after you sent me the article, like, do you see signs in units, even in the employee, you know, in the break room or where you know, where we're supposed to be playing cards, there's no sign that says, you know, not so much suicide prevention, but just mental health for what you deal with. So, you know, it goes kind of, the profession does lead a hand in that. You know, obviously not every nurse suicide is professionally driven. But I think that it could definitely play a toll in it, and I don't think that it is addressed at all. Well, we're going to play the video from that came up this past week. All right?
And I want to thank you for coming here today.
Thank you for having me, Jade.
So you write about a Southern California nurse who died by suicide, and the reaction to her death by her emergency room colleagues really gives insight into how that industry deals with this. Can you talk about that for a bit?
Sure. So I wrote about a nurse named Dana, who is this vibrant, energetic, caring, smart, funny nurse who took her own life last year. And When that happened, a lot of her nurse colleagues and even her family were really shocked by this. Even though they're medical professionals and they're trained to recognize the signs of depression and suicide, they really never saw this coming. And the reaction to her death among the leadership at the hospital where she worked was also kind of a second blow for some of the nurses at that hospital. They felt like they weren't given the time to grieve that they needed. There was a crisis debriefing for people who had worked directly on Dana, because Dana was brought to the same hospital where she worked. And there was a sort of memorial for her. They put up a memorial box in the nurses' lounge. But on the whole, the message from leadership was, shh, don't talk about this. We don't want to hear you talking about this at the hospital. Here's a number to call if you need to talk to someone, but we need this kept quiet.
And the stigma surrounding depression in the medical community is an issue. Can you talk to me about how that impacts who gets treatment?
Sure. So stigma in general in society around mental health is very strong, even now. Even with the celebrities and the pop stars coming out talking about their mental health issues. Within medicine, stigma is extremely strong. Even though medical professionals will see a patient and be caring towards that patient, among themselves, it's not uncommon for them to talk about, the crazy in bed 3, or if there's...
So like we said, it's not always professional. And this video talks about, of course, that there's more, but in this particular one, I mean, I've never fortunately had a colleague of mine rolled right into my ICU to take care of that, that was then pronounced brain dead. Right. So that's a whole nother trauma. Your nurse colleague who just worked with you 2 days ago tried to commit suicide, brought into you to now take care of.
Yeah, and the trauma for you of that too, and then it kind of then touches on the whole HIPAA thing, how much can we talk about as the care, and in the clip they were talking about how we don't really discuss it. It gets kind of shooed under, and it goes, well, how much. It kind of is that gray area too, where it should be discussed. This is again a colleague. If I've unfortunately never had it for suicide, but I've unfortunately had, fortunately no one for suicide, but right. Unfortunately, I have had a colleague who's rolled in and it was, has not made it. And the hospital at the time that I was at was great. They brought in counselors and we discussed, but it was very much an area where it was, how much of this are we going to we're going to discuss the loss of him, or her, but we're not going to discuss the ins and outs of the case because this is still somebody's medical records. And, that's where, and as nurses, a lot of, I know a lot of nurses who won't go to the hospital that we're at. And it's not because they think poorly of the hospital, but more so because they don't want, their peers knowing their medical business.
Right.
And
right.
There's a lot of things in place to protect that. But when they wrote, in the video, she talked about the stigmas that go with, overdoses and suicide attempts and in nurses that take care of that population, being in critical care. We see those, in all shapes and sizes and forms. And it, those comments, they do run with nurses. So then it's like, wait, will you say that about patient A, but you won't, you won't say it about, the patient who comes in because they're your coworker.
Right.
So but it's true. There is no, discussion about it all. And we also, the HIPAA comes into play, and that's where you're like, how much of this, does everybody need to know? So I don't know, if the units are, in the story in particular that she was talking about in that clip, she talked about how it wasn't very highly discussed in the unit. Everyone in that ER said, we're not going to discuss this. It's kind of hush hush. And my question comes in, was it, at what point should it be discussed, and at what point should it not? At what point do we say that's too much?
Right.
Or we're talking about the details that aren't really mattering. But I think that the mental health for nurses is not addressed. We don't think about, we just kind of assume it's the the casualty of what we do. It kind of comes with the territory. It's part of nursing, and we're still people, and we don't think about that.
Well, and I was just listening to a podcast a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks ago, and an academician who is a nursing scholar, said that one of her concerns about it is building resilience in nurses. And I was like, is this completely like placing the blame? Oh, she's not resilient, so she's weak.
Right. And that's what I was saying. We kind of we get to this mentality that you're supposed to just learn how to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
But, we don't, and yes, death and like I said, death and dying is part of our profession, but we don't, it still affects all humans.
Right.
I mean, we don't just assume that, a mortician can just he doesn't watch people die, so we wouldn't just assume that, that's okay. It's the profession
Right.
he chose. They should
Right.
you should learn to bounce back. I mean, I think that hearing that nurses should become resilient is almost saying like we should be able to clock our emotions
Right.
out. And
Right.
I don't think that just ignoring your emotions, I feel like leads to these nurse
Right.
suicides. It's not a
Right.
matter of resilience. It's a matter of how we learn to deal
Right.
and cope. And we're not, some people truly don't need that. They can handle it. That's just something that's not that part of, them is not tied into it all. But
Right.
there are other people who are wonderful nurses and can deal with it, but maybe they need to talk to
Right.
somebody and don't realize
Right.
that that's what they need to do. And we don't touch on it at all.
Right. Well, touching on it even more so is, so I brought it in the article. I don't know if you saw the article about the twin deaths where when a nurse makes a mistake that reaches a patient that kills the patient. And in the article that we're going to bring up, it's about the nurse who made a mistake, pulled the wrong dose of calcium, gave it, even though she was a very seasoned nurse, we can't say, oh, well, she's young, she's new. She's a very seasoned nurse. In that moment, she gave what she thought was the right dose, even though she said she's given it thousands of times before as a NICU nurse, that reached that baby, that killed the baby. She was let go, which we know sometimes happens. It's been happening more and more lately, where it's not, there's no such thing as apology. The nurse license was removed. Her career was gone. She committed suicide. She ended her life because her thing was like, I think that because her career was taken away, something she loved was taken away, and and she just said, I think, I have nothing else to live for.
She lost everything.
Killing this baby weighed on her already so heavily.
Right.
Weighed on her already so heavily, to now lose her career, to lose the respect of her colleagues, to going home and sitting at home.
And even in that circumstance, that's not even, that kind of argues that like against that whole, nurses need to be resilient. This was an isolated major sentinel event, major thing. Like, this nurse lost her license, and we basically took her and we said, oh, you're a nurse and you're supposed to take care of these babies, and this went wrong and you killed somebody, and then we revoked her license, and she went through administrative things, whether that right, wrong, or otherwise. But then we just said, okay, free person. We didn't think about the fact that we just punished this woman for killing a child, and there was no nursing support, no backup in the healthcare field. Even if we were gonna, give her all the, punish her, and she was gonna, get, sentenced and lose her license, and there, definitely was things that went into play.
Right.
Hopefully the hospital didn't just do that. They looked at the system and the breakdown. She said she's done this before, so there's obviously, again, system fail. But we put the blame on her. But then major things, we just, when we take and we impeach a president, we don't just assume they're going to be okay.
Right.
But this nurse killed a child, and she was not doing it necessarily maliciously. We figured out it was based on her, what she said, and she's done it before. It was an accident. It was, and yet we never thought maybe this woman's going through something. Maybe we should support her. I'm not saying necessarily you have to give her nursing license back, but what about offering her some mental health support? We took everything. I'm a proud nurse. We're proud. Nurses are very proud of what they do.
We are.
And if you take that away, you've taken a part of somebody's identity from them. And no one recovers from a loss of identity without something. And, there needs to be some kind of support. And we just don't let it. We go, oh, it's your career, and that's your personal life.
I was even thinking more so about we all make mistakes. I've made a medical mistake. I've made an error, and that can be as simple as the doctor said, "Hey, LR," and I was like, "Oh, I didn't read it correctly." I said, "Oh, we're gonna do a bolus. I'm gonna do normal saline."
Right.
And that could be a medical error. And while that isn't life threatening, at the end of the day, if you look at it on face value, it's considered a medical error. So we've all I don't care. Any nurse, any doctor has made a mistake and said, you know what? Oh God, in the moment I didn't make the right choice. And then to lose your career. And I mean, it's going to drive nurses even more so to not report when they make a mistake.
Right.
Which we know, both of us have witnessed, nurses making errors.
Right.
And I think it's just bad all the way around.
Right. And the thing is like, even back with like our first story, there's not necessarily somebody to blame, but yes, you need to look at the whole picture and people need to be educated and things need to be done. And, like, again, the logistics of somebody losing their license or not is my opinion on that is there's really not much of an opinion there. That just kind of depends on the circumstance. But at the same time, I mean, we revoke somebody's license, and do we look at the system breakdown and, where nurses don't have the end all be all in a hospital.
Right, right.
Yes, they're the patient advocate, they're the ones that touch the patient, but there's a whole system in place. And I mean, you joke even at work about barcode scanning and errors and all these things, and it's like, well, there's got to be there's a reason there's a system in place, and there's some accountability to us as nurses. We knew what we got into, we are that final stop between the medication and the patient, or the procedure and the patient, or anything as far we do timeouts to make sure it's the right location and those things. But at the same time, we are not the only people. We are not the only medical providers, and there's a system fail if this nurse can say that she's done this more than once with a wrong dose.
I think it was only once that she's made the mistake, but she's given calcium. She's given the correct amount of calcium thousands of times. But this one particular time, she didn't second guess it. She didn't look. She saw the order. She pulled it. She gave it.
Right. And and again, the blame or the whatever, but we don't think the suicide part of it all is where we're not thinking about how, people are processing this. We say, they need to have resilience. Well, we also don't think about the toll that this, that what they're going through. And, like I said, after reading this article, I've thought for the last couple of days, like, where do we see anything that says, is this too much?
Right. I mean, I was thinking about like my own stuff. I mean, it's already anxiety provoking enough. Everything you do, you really need to second guess, think about it before you do it. I mean, so much so that, I don't mind disclosing like my own thing. I had developed like irritable bowel because I was so anxious about everything that I did that I just had to step away from the bedside for a little while to regain my own mental health because everything was making me so nervous. I didn't want to hurt anybody. It's the worst feeling that you can have. So to always then second guess yourself. So I'm sure even if this nurse had kept her job, if she was allowed to keep her job, every day she would have played this tape over and over and over in her head before she gave any little medication to a NICU baby of all things. This wasn't a 65-year-old grandma. This is a NICU baby. She's so already you're on pins and needles and afraid. And with your calculator. I remember those days of working in peace with your calculator just to give Tylenol to make sure it's the right dose for your patient who has the right weight. It's so much that goes into it. I really felt like, it was really a fail on the hospital's part.
It was. And, then you get with the other side of it, and it's like you said, she's given this 1,000 times over. And, we as nurses, we get, we have years underneath us, and we've done, we've worked in the same settings, and you give a lot of the same meds, and it becomes very much a routine to you where, I'm sure we spend time training new nurses because, as a senior nurse, you become the one that then, nurtures your young. And it's a big thing to say, like, you just, any person gets very comfortable in their job, and our job requires you to make sure you're always on top of things. That comfort is dangerous. That that the knowledge base that you have is strong, but that comfort level, it can get to you. And we don't, how do you address that? Like, how do you, these nurses, more senior they are, the more comfortable they are in their job. So and then, like you said, this air kind of thing happens, and then they're very hyper vigilant and they're on top of things, and it's very nerve wracking. And that, it comes with the territory, but it's the outcome of it all. We still go home and think about that. And there's an aspect to it that can really drive them into a dark place.
Right. Oh, I mean, I don't like to ever end this show on a bad note. So in order to end this on a good note, as usual, we're choosing our person of the week, which was an amazing nurse from Venezuela. When I saw the story, my assistant Tomas is like, "Go Venezuela!" At a time when like so many countries around the world are like at like unrest because of like politics and all of that, we have people who are doing good, who are really like reaching within themselves or looking to some higher power to reach out and help their fellow man. And this particular nurse, Fabiola Molero, from Venezuela, from a very small town, found, and I don't know how small it is, by the way. I'm just like, it seems small when you live in New York City.
Smaller than Central Park right now.
Exactly. When she saw this picture of the baby, Annalise, in the New York Times, and it had already been in a Venezuelan paper, a 2-year-old, by the way, and we're going to bring up the article. So the article, I mean, this is a picture of a 2-year-old, a malnourished, malnutritioned 2-year-old who unfortunately had some neurological disorders and some medical issues. I mean, when you saw this, I mean, we go above and beyond, and people think we're like fabulous because we're travel nurses, like we make all this money. I mean, my mind was blown.
Yeah,
that she hitchhiked even.
Right. I mean, she showed that she went with her heart and followed her heart, and that's where it touched on. She's a nurse, and she's a nurse inside, and she followed her heart to make a difference, and it's. It just goes to remind you, just not even just in nursing, but just as people, like there are good people, out there. Right. And she went and took a profession that she could have just, ignored. And she, like you said, she went above and beyond to make a difference to humans. And yeah, I mean, she did anything she had to do to get where she had to be. And
I mean, we're going to bring, I think I have like a geographical map. It's not one of the best, but I'm not great at geography. So she hitchhiked from her small town of like Maracaibo, I don't know if I'm saying it correctly, to Teos Island, which is like no easy hike. First off, the island is already cut off from Venezuela. I think both physically and financially. So the people there are already suffering. In this particular picture was the baby in a hospital. So that's not like, oh, she's at home. Right. Like when she's in a hospital that has been abandoned because the last patient died, apparently. And so she hitchhiked with 15 days of multivitamins, of vitamins and food and water to like care for this baby.
Right.
Not a baby, a 2-year-old. It looks like a baby.
It looks like a baby.
It looks like a baby.
Yeah. And, it goes to just show, like she found in her, she knew she could make a difference or try to make a difference. Right. But like you say, it's not even just we all go in and try to make a difference every day. This woman went and yeah, I mean, moved above. Yeah,
I don't sometimes want to take. I sometimes don't want to walk 14 blocks. I'm like, can I Uber? Let alone hitchhike with personal strangers. Ask them to like, hey, can you give me a ride? She hitchhiked with strangers, and to get to like this town, this island, it was just like, wow. Yeah. Like, what drives like a person to really just like say, you know what? I know I'm not the best, because I'm sure she's not rich, she's not wealthy, she's not well-to-do, to take what little I do have and go to such measures to like help somebody else, not my baby, somebody else's baby that's far away, because I can't see other humans suffering.
Right. I mean, because that picture it just drew her, and I mean, yeah, like you said, she couldn't let it go. And she had to make a difference, and it puts your faith back in nurses. When you
hear the other stories that we've heard, that we report on, you're like, How did they make all this 15, 16, 17 years as the most ethical profession? You know, people are people at the end of the day, and people bring themselves, their whole selves, a part of themselves into nursing, into healthcare as doctors, you know, and they make decisions and choices that sometimes goes against what we believe in as a profession. And that doesn't color the profession, it colors who that person is. I just wish that, you know, we had more stories like this.
I wish that more nurses lived I mean, she lives the nursing life.
Breathes.
Like, she breathes nursing. Exactly. It just, you know, this wasn't something that was presented to her and, you know, in her hospital as a let's fund this. Work. Yeah, let's do mission work. I mean, mission work is great. I mean, I love when we hear our coworkers are going on mission trips and doing, you know, it's a beautiful thing, but this wasn't something that was presented to her. This just goes to show that, like, some people really do just breathe and live the nursing, you know, theory and the things that we, you know, some people turn it on when they go for 12 hours and turn it off when they leave, and you know, others don't, and it's nice to hear when they don't.
Right. Oh my God, Jenny, I think so. Fabiola Malero, thank you for all that you've done. I mean, I wish we could like reach out and give you a hug and send you $1 million. But I'm a struggling blogger and a struggling traveling nurse. I don't know if the two get to go together. But I mean, continue to do all the great work that we all do. And no matter what profession you're in, even if you're an accountant, you're helping somebody figure out how to make their money work and how to make, you know, family wealth and all of those things. Thank you guys. I mean, I don't know, Jenny, you want to add something? I mean, that's the end of our show. We had like an amazing show through all of these challenges.
Yes, and it's been a beautiful day.
Right, and it's been a beautiful day. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. Tune in next week. I'll be back on the Nurse Doc show, and so I'll have on some fabulous brothers, and we got to continue the conversation.